Hi, my name is Abhishek Hemrajani, and I'm from the Azure Compute team. I lead program management for Azure Migrate and Azure Site Recovery. I'm going to be joined by Liza from Cloudamize and more from Turbonomic as we walk you through the process of assessing your on-premises environment to migrate to Azure with confidence. There has never really been a better time to migrate to Azure. IT is looking to optimize on the efficiencies and gains that cloud can drive for businesses. And Azure is enabling that for our customers. Our customers continue to think of migrating to the cloud and optimizing their IT spend as the top two drivers in 2018 and 2019. In addition to these drivers, there are a few other things that are driving the migration journey to the cloud. Data center expiration. As customers come up to data center lease expiration, they are looking for cloud to basically suck in all of that infrastructure that they were running on premises. Similarly, integrating acquisitions. There is no better way to gain efficiency from an acquisition, pretty much compress that time to realize the value of an acquisition than migrate to the cloud. Capacity needs when you're scaling up your business or going or expanding or diversifying into a new area makes cloud an optimal choice to drive migration. Software and hardware refreshes are another great examples of what's driving the migration journey. Security and compliance. Customers are realizing that Microsoft, the trusted cloud that Azure is, can enable a better security and compliance posture for customers than they can do that themselves. And honestly, all of that is driven around and pivoted by application innovation. Customers want newer, better ways to deliver value to their end customers, and cloud is enabling that momentum for them. And that's exactly what we're seeing with everything that's happening with Azure. Now, in addition to all of these drivers for the cloud migration, what's really complementing the cloud growth is the fact that Azure as a platform continues to innovate every single week, every single day. A few that I want to call out for you. Our new enhancements in Azure Migrate makes it very easy for customers to assess their on-premises environment for lifting and shifting apps, data, and infrastructure to the cloud. Even our investments in database migration service make it easy for customers to move to newer platforms like SQL Managed Instance in Azure or SQL Azure. All of these innovations are pretty much centered around our promise to help customers migrate to the cloud and provide them a platform that can really help value for their business. And it's starting to show in the customer momentum. Customers like Allscripts and Chevron have enabled massive gains through their migration to Azure. And these are a few of the many thousands of customers who are realizing value of the Azure platform and continue to bring more and more of their apps, data, and infra into Azure. Now let's look at a most common Azure migration journey. And to be honest, there's a few different things that customers tend to do. When you're thinking about the mass migration, customers tend to use lift and shift as a way to move their workloads to the cloud. So you're pretty much rehosting what you were running on-prem in the cloud. But there are a few other options. You could potentially refactor with containers, or you could re-architect with PaaS offerings or PaaS modules like running your databases in a PaaS service. Or you could pretty much rebuild your entire app with newer modern cloud paradigms with cloud-native computing and cloud-first technologies. Now, irrespective of which path you choose to migrate to the cloud, the stages are three. You start off by discovering and assessing your on-premises environment to really figure out how you want to get to the cloud and what is it going to cost you to run in the cloud. You then choose a migration option that best meets the need. Either you do a mass lift and shift, or you modernize as you go along. And then once you're in the cloud, you continue to optimize. You enable secure and well-managed infrastructure for your applications once they are in the cloud, or you gain from efficiencies in the cloud, or potentially even containerize workloads that have been brought into the cloud. That's a journey you get on once you're in the cloud. Now, Microsoft has tools for every stage. When you think about assess, Azure Migrate, Database Migration Assistant, and SQL Server Migration Assistant enable customers to assess their on-prem infra and data for migration into Azure. I'm going to quickly get into the Azure Migrate piece of this conversation and show you how Azure Migrate works, and even give you a cool demo showing all the capabilities that we've enabled. When it comes to migration, Database Migration Assistant and Azure Site Recovery enable free, easy-to-use, at-scale options for you to get to Azure. And then once you're in Azure, our platform capabilities enable secure and well-managed infra with offerings such as Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, and cost management. But that's tools from Microsoft. We also have a very expansive ecosystem of partners who are enabling technologies in each of these areas. A few I want to call out. Cloudomize and Turbonomic enable great solutions for assessment going to Azure. Similarly, Cloud Endure offers a compelling offering to migrate workloads into Azure. The most important thing is that the customers get a choice to choose what works for them when they are looking at migrating to Azure. Now let's start talking about how do you go about discovering and assessing your on-premises environment with Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate is a new service. We GA'd a few months ago, and it offers capabilities that help you discover your on-prem applications, your virtual machines, and even the dependencies across the various tiers of the applications so that you can start getting insightful assessments on what's ready to go to Azure and how best to get there. You get estimations such as what's the right size of running the workload in Azure. Customers, when they tend to run workloads on-prem, routinely have over-provisioned infra. At times, they also have under-provisioning. But as they are moving to the cloud, that's the right time to do some spring cleaning, really figure out if you need all that capacity and how best to save money when you're running in Azure. You can also figure out what is it going to cost you to run your workload in Azure. So of course, running a workload in Azure is obviously much more cost effective, but you can save even more with the cost assessment that we provide with Azure Migrate. Now, Azure Migrate currently supports the VMware platform for discovery and assessment, but very soon we will announce capabilities for Hyper-V and physical server discovery and assessment with Azure Migrate. Additionally, we are also working very hard to seamlessly integrate Azure Migrate with Azure Site Recovery so you can have a contextual handoff between your discovery and assessment and the actual migrate phase of your entire migration journey. So let's start talking a little bit about Azure Migrate in detail. I promise I'm going to show you a demo, but before that, let's look at how things really work conceptually with Azure Migrate. You start off by creating an on-premises appliance, which is called the Azure Migrate Collector, to start connecting to your vCenter environment so you can perform discovery. The way to do that is if you have a vCenter server environment, simply download the Collector appliance in an OVA format from the Azure portal, import it into your vCenter environment. It comes up as a virtual machine appliance. Once that is done, data from the vCenter platform, this is existing performance data and configuration data, starts flowing into Azure Migrate, where it gets processed. And then within a few clicks, you're able to initiate assessment creation, which will tell you things like, is your workload ready to go to Azure? What size of VMs do you want to run in Azure? Even what type of storage you may want to run in Azure? And what is it going to cost you to run in Azure, and what savings you can get from moving to Azure? So all of that I'm going to show you in a demo, but that's how it works conceptually. Now, in terms of new features, we've done a lot of innovation in the last few months since Azure Migrate released. I want to quickly call out, we now support Azure reserved instances, so you can price what is it going to cost you to run reserved instances in Azure. We are also supporting Azure Gov, Azure Germany, and Azure China as target regions for your migration. And as you may have heard, Microsoft recently announced support for Windows Server 2008, 32-bit and 64-bit running in Azure. Azure Migrate can now give you recommendations for those workloads moving to Azure as well. I'm going to quickly jump over to a demo environment and show you how all of this works. So here I have a vCenter vSphere environment, which basically has all of my virtual machines that are running my applications. So I'm logged into the VMware vSphere client, and I can see that I have a few virtual machines that represent an app that is running my payroll system. So the VMs that I'm interested to migrate to Azure are part of the payroll app, and they are the front tier VMs, the middle tier VMs, and some data VMs. Basically, it's 9 virtual machines that are making up my app, and I know about them because I have context on what my app is. But Azure Migrate can even let you figure out if you don't know all the virtual machines that may be part of your app. So now that I've seen my virtual machines, let me take you over to the Azure portal to see how you can actually get started. So back on the Azure portal, you can see that you can create what's called an Azure Migrate project, which can hold all of your discovery data in one place. The Azure Migrate project in so many ways is a repository of what you're running in your vCenter environment. So you can create a new Azure Migrate project by simply giving it a name. So I'm going to call mine Contoso. you can specify a resource group that should be holding this Migrate project. And then you can choose a location where you want to run your Azure Migrate project from. Now, the thing to note is that the Azure Migrate project can be placed in any Azure region. The region from where you do the assessment does not necessarily have to be the region where you will migrate. So from one Azure project, you can do an assessment for any and every Azure region. So you don't really need separate projects in separate Azure regions. So I'm going to go ahead and create one project, and then I'm going to see how I can get started with the rest of the process. I'm going to quickly jump over to a project that I created already, and I called it empty because it's not hosting anything right now. The easiest way to get started is by downloading the Azure Migrate Collector appliance and connecting it to your vCenter environment. When you first come into an empty Azure project, you get the prompt to get started. Simply click on Discover and Assess. Once you click on Discover Machines, you get the steps that you need to perform to import that OVA that you download from the portal into your vCenter environment. So simply click on Download. You download the OVA file, create a collector virtual machine out of it. vCenter admins are pretty familiar with how you import an OVA to create a virtual machine in the vCenter environment. Once you've done that, you simply connect your collector to your vCenter environment and discovery data starts flowing in. It's as simple as that. Now, what I've done is I've already downloaded the collector appliance and I have imported it into a virtual machine that's now running my collector. Once you've done that and you log into that virtual machine for the first time, you get a very simple experience that in 4 steps helps you configure your Azure Migrate project to get started with assessments. So as step 1, you need to make sure that you can connect to the internet. Now, this can happen via a proxy or without a proxy based on your security rules. You need to make sure that VMware Power CLI is running. Azure Migrate uses VMware Power CLI to interact with the vCenter platform, and that's why we need Power CLI. You then specify the vCenter server that you're going to be using. So the vCenter server that I showed you as part of my demo, which had my virtual machines, I have provided the credentials and the location for that vCenter environment. Now, a cool thing is that you can scope your discovery based on the hosts and the clusters that you want to discover. Now, this is particularly helpful if you're running a multi-tenanted environment and you don't want to discover everything at the same time in one project. So you can scope it down to the host or the cluster that makes sense to you from an assessment perspective. I'm going to stick with the one that I have already selected. Notice that it says it has 292 virtual machines. You can then specify the migration project that you're going to connect to. So the empty project that I just created, I simply provide that migration project and the key to the project. And it's as simple as that. I can initiate the collection process, and then within a few minutes, I would have my discovery data available in the Azure portal, and I'll be ready to create my first assessment. Let's quickly jump back to an environment where this discovery has already been completed. So I have 292 virtual machines as the scope specified. I also have a few assessments and groups, but I'll show you how to get there. And I can basically now get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm ready to create an assessment. And I'm going to play the persona of a user who already knows the virtual machines that are going to be part of that migration process. So since I am running my payroll app and I know the 9 virtual machines that are part of that app, I'm going to go jump right into picking my inventory myself. So I click on Create Assessment. You now get the option to name the group. An Azure Migrate group works as an application or the group that defines the virtual machines that you will migrate at the same time. So since I'm migrating my payroll app, I'm going to call this group Payroll. And because I already know the virtual machines that are part of my payroll app, I'm going to go ahead and search for the word tier and find the 9 virtual machines that are part of that app. So I selected the 9 virtual machines and I clicked on Create Assessment. It's as simple as that. Create the group, bring in your inventory, and your assessment is ready. Now notice that the row says that the assessment is being computed, but what you'll notice is that if you click on it, insights have already started flowing in. Because Azure Migrate connected to the vCenter platform, data, both performance and configuration that was already available on the vCenter platform has already been sucked into Azure Migrate. We can now start giving you assessments without having to wait pretty much any amount of time, and you can get started with your first assessment. Let's look at what an assessment typically tells you. So I'm going to look at Azure Readiness as the first widget that tells me if my virtual machines are ready to go to Azure. So of course, I had 9 virtual machines. Azure Migrate tells me that 6 are ready to go to Azure. For 3 of them, Azure Migrate's telling me that there is some conditional readiness that I need to look at. For example, one of my virtual machines is intentionally running the EFI boot as a process to boot itself. Now, as you may know, EFI is not supported in Azure. That said, Azure Site Recovery can, on runtime, convert your EFI-based virtual machines into BIOS-based virtual machines. So even though it's saying unsupported boot type, you can still migrate this virtual machine with Azure Site Recovery, and that's what the suggested tool is telling you. It also tells you that you're potentially running a Windows platform that is not supported in Azure. And it says the Windows Server 2008 32-bit VM has been detected. But as you may have already heard, Microsoft now supports running Windows Server 2008 32-bit. So in pretty much just the amount of time where that official announcement goes out, Azure Migrate would automatically update its logic to start flagging this virtual machine is actually ready and not just conditionally ready. So that's the power of Azure Migrate being able to keep in track and keep in touch with everything that's happening on the Azure platform to enable assessments and discoveries which are very relevant from what's happening in Azure on a day-to-day basis. Similarly, you may have been running a Linux platform that the vendor may not support running in Azure, for example, an older version of CentOS or Red Hat. But I'm going to assume everything is OK from an assessment and a readiness perspective, and I'm going to start seeing what else I have available in my assessment. So from an assessment perspective, notice I also have a cost estimate available of what is it going to cost me to run in Azure. Let's look at what this cost looks like. Turns out the Azure Migrate system has actually made a recommendation on each of those VMs and what VM size they should be running in Azure. So for example, my data tier VM can run on an F4 series. Now this is recommendation based on actual usage of the VM. Since we are able to look at the performance data on the VM, we can figure out what's the right size. If you've over-provisioned, we can tell you based on CPU, proc, and data usage on that virtual machine that what's the best VM family to go to. It can really help you save cost and not spend on infra that you don't need. You can also figure out what type of storage is being recommended and what kind of cost is it going to take to run that kind of workload in Azure. Now, for any reason, if you want to change the considerations of the assessment, you can do that as well. So for example, if you want to assess for any other Azure region than the one that you've chosen, because the rates may be different in different geographies, you can simply select the target details that work for you. So notice the same Azure Migrate project can help you do an assessment for every single Azure region. You don't need a project in every single region. Similarly, Azure Migrate, because now it supports reserved instances, you can figure out if you want to do pricing based on a 1-year reserved instance or 3-year reserved instance, or you don't want to use reserved instances. So you can do that, and we'll factor in the cost when we tell you what is it going to cost you to run in Azure. You can also benefit from Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server. So if you have software assurance which covers moving your Windows Server licenses to Azure, simply select yes, and you'll get a cost plan which really mimics the cost you're going to pay for running those workloads in Azure. Very powerful in terms of what you can do with your assessment and even specify how you want it to be very lenient or very strict. I'm going to stick with the defaults, and I'm going to go back to my assessment. So with my assessment set, I already knew what my app was. I already knew the VMs in the app. I'm pretty much ready to migrate. The other thing that the Azure Migrate assessment tells me is that what tool I should be running to do the migration to Azure. So notice for the VMs, it's telling me I can use Azure Site Recovery. For some of the VMs where it detected a database, it's actually telling me use database migration service. You can pretty much create a migration strategy, which is a composite function of moving VMs to VMs in Azure or moving databases to SQL Managed Instance or SQL Azure. Now, this is assuming that you knew exactly what your app was and what the VMs in the app were. Now, routinely, when you're doing mass migrations to Azure, thousands and thousands of VMs, you probably don't have the luxury to figure out with every app admin that what VMs are you running. Apps, in turn, usually depend on other infra within the data center, and it becomes very hard to figure out what really is the boundary of an application. To be able to figure all of that detail out, Azure Migrate also lets you do application dependency modeling. And the way to do that is pretty straightforward. You simply go into the Machines view. This will show all the 292 machines that I have in my Azure Migrate project. Look for at least one virtual machine that you know is part of your app. So while I know the 9 VMs that are part of my payroll app, I'm going to just stick with one. So I'm going to pick the middle tier VM1, and I'm going to start from there. Notice it tells me that I can view the dependencies on that virtual machine. So I have the dependency agent already running on these virtual machines. I click on View Dependencies, and very quickly I get a graphical representation of everything that's happening on this virtual machines. What are the inbound connections? What are the outbound connections? What are the different processes that are talking to other virtual machines? And I can basically start getting a sense of what my application is. So it tells me that the middle tier VM is talking to the front tier VM, and it also tells me that it is in turn talking to the data tier VMs. What I can now do is I can start selecting virtual machines one at a time and basically create a new migration group which is based on application dependency. So in many ways, the group is now even more high confidence because instead of simply relying on the app admin's instinct or tribal knowledge, I have now benefited from the dependency view that's available in the Azure Migrate product for free to figure out what my application boundary is. So I'm going to select these 4 virtual machines, and I'm going to create a new group. And again, I can give the group a name. So I'm going to call it Contoso 2. And then I can select the virtual machines. And I can also say, while I'm creating a group, go ahead and also create my first assessment. So you shouldn't have to create a group and then go and create an assessment. We can do it all at once. Now, the other cool part of all of this is that Azure Migrate also supports the ability to figure out recursive dependencies. For example, if this group was in turn depending on something that may have not been captured from a VM view, you can simply click on viewing the dependencies for the group, and you can start figuring out any other virtual machines that may be part of this group. So I click on View Dependencies at the group level, and sure enough, I should find a virtual machine that had a dependency on the app as a whole, but did not show up as if you went about the VM process. So you'll notice here I found a middle tier VM2, which was not directly talking to middle tier VM1, but it was talking to one of the other VMs that the middle tier VM1 depends on. And all I can do is I can simply say, add that machine into the group, and the group becomes even more high confidence. In so many ways, Azure Migrate can tell you what is the real boundary of your application or the set of VMs that you're going to migrate to Azure. You can be very sure that you're migrating everything that needs to migrate, and you won't have any uptime issue or application issues once you've migrated to Azure. And that's pretty powerful, and all of that is available for free and available for VMware, already generally available. So that was a demo that I had for you guys. Let me quickly jump back to my slide and talk about a few of the other assessment tools that are available already and how you could go about thinking about which one works for you and which may be a better choice. Now, in my conversations with customers, there are a few different criteria that customers think of when they think about which assessment tool works best for them. And it routinely comes up if the customer prefers a tool that may be from Microsoft or if it's a free tool. Customers also deeply care about, can you discover your infra and your apps without installing an agent? Customers also tend to have infrastructure that may expand VMware, Hyper-V, and physical servers. So can you have one tool that does it all? Similarly, some customers also care about application dependencies. So what I just showed you with that Contoso payroll app, for a customer that does not really know how many apps am I running, how many of them are legacy systems, and what are the VMs, that application dependency view can be very, very powerful to make that high confidence decision. And then also, you may have a lot of inventory data available in existing CMDB systems, and you may have the preference to pull all of that data into your assessment tool instead of starting all over again. So in the context of all of these considerations, here's my recommendation. There are a few different tools both from Microsoft and our partners that can help meet each of these goals. And the tool that works best for you is something that you can choose from our vast array of tools that are listed on the Azure Migration Center. For example, our partners can do discovery and assessment for heterogeneous environments, including Hyper-V and physical servers. So while Azure Migrate does not have that capability yet, it will very soon. Currently, if you want to choose one of our partner tools like Cloudamize or Turbonomic, you can do that. Some of our partner tools also already offer capabilities for importing from existing CMDB and other sources, and that choice is something that you can make once you've looked at what really matters to you from an assessment and discovery perspective. So here's my guidance. Use Azure Migrate if you're very cost conscious and you're looking for a free option to get started, especially for a VMware environment. If you feel very comfortable having an Azure branded tool, Azure Migrate is a tool that can help you. Also, because Azure Migrate ships from Azure, any new Azure SKUs and changes to the Azure platform will reflect in the Azure Migrate assessments pretty close to when they become available. Some of our partners follow their own release cycles, so it may take them a little while to declare support for a certain SKU, so you may have some confidence issues with the assessment. At the same time, use ISV tools when it makes more sense to you, especially when you're looking to assess heterogeneous infrastructure, which may be VMware Hyper-V, and you don't want a different tool for those scenarios. If you want one tool that covers it all, look at one of our partner tools that are already available. Or if you're looking for agentless dependency visualization, now in the case of Azure Migrate, we did need a dependency agent on the VM to be able to figure out dependencies and what the processes were doing on that virtual machine. Some of our partners actually offer that capability without agent, and you may want to look at those tool options if they work for you. More importantly, use the tool that best meets your need, because you want to get to Azure with confidence and you want to get to Azure real quick to start extracting value from the Azure platform. All right, now that we've seen what Azure Migrate can do for you, let's bring in Cloudamize to see how their discovery and assessment capabilities help. So I have Liza here from Cloudamize, and she's going to show you just that.
Thanks, Abhishek. My name is Liza Bernella, and I'm a Customer Success Manager at Cloudamize. Cloudamize is a cloud computing analytics platform that provides detailed analytics and automation to speed and simplify cloud migration planning and execution. The SaaS platform offers both agent-based as well as agentless data collection approaches in order to meet nearly all enterprise needs in different verticals. Cloudamize can also accommodate for both single-tenant as well as multi-tenant architecture needs in all Azure regions. We begin with the Assess module, and here the platform is providing a detailed TCO analysis. Some of the key value drivers are right-sizing, customizing the reports to meet the project needs, and providing granular analytics. We then move into the Plan module, in which Cloudamize will automate application discovery and dependency mapping. This is where the majority of our clients find the most value because it eliminates the traditional manual work when it comes to migrating to the cloud, as well as provides essential data critical to planning a successful migration. The Migrate module allows clients to migrate seamlessly through our integrations with ASR, among others. You can use these integrations to help reduce risks as well as overall accelerate the migration to Azure. In short, we've delivered over 2,000 assessments and worked with Fortune 500 companies, large enterprises such as Jabil, Nielsen, Foot Locker, and more. With over 70,000 nodes deployed, Cloudamize has been able to reduce planning cycles on average of 75%, primarily through that automation, as well as see significant cost savings for our enterprises on average of 48%, primarily through right-sizing and optimization. We will now take a more technical dive into the demo. Here we are with Cloudamize's Assess module, and in this phase, what we do is collect system-level data, so things like CPU, memory, network I/O, disk I/O. Now, what Cloudamize does that's unique at this phase is apply proprietary thresholds and public cloud benchmarks. This is what allows the platform to very accurately project cost and performance into Azure. The data in the charts displayed down below represents the observed data on-premise as well as the predicted data in Azure. Clients can use this data to not only validate and understand the Cloudamize results, but also very quickly identify workloads that you may be able to potentially further optimize. You can drill down into each specific machine and see the data at a more granular level. This allows you to provision more precisely on an ongoing basis. This particular graph is displaying CPU, and as you can see, all of the peaks and valleys are time-stamped. Cloudamize's Designer feature allows you to make changes to the results very quickly within the UI. Some of the changes that you can make are taking advantage of the Azure advantages, such as RI purchases or hybrid benefit use. You can also make your own changes in order to meet the specific needs that are driving this particular project. Here we are in Cloudamize's Plan module. At this stage, we collect application-level data, so things like the executable names, firewall rules, so on and so forth. Now to the left, you can very quickly identify machines in the environment. To the right, you can identify applications as well as their dependencies. Here we have a group. Within groups are assets, and assets can be considered as move groups. Within the move groups are machines. The applications to the right represent applications that have some sort of communication happening in the environment. You can filter this by either multiple machines or individual machines. Beyond that, you can very quickly search for a particular machine and identify that in the platform. To the right, again, are the applications that have some sort of communication happening from this particular machine. Here, I can quickly see PHP, which would indicate a web application. Once I select that application, the Cloudomize platform will automatically map out the dependencies that were observed during the data collection period. Furthermore, you can drill down into that specific dependency to understand exactly how the two machines are communicating. So to the right, we'll notice PHP is the process running on the client machine. SQL Server is the process running on the server machine. This indicates that you have a front end of the web application communicating to the back end. What we'll want to do in this case is reconcile these dependencies and build out a logical move group. That's one way that you can create a move group based on these interdependencies, and you can do that very quickly within the Cloudomize platform through this Move Interconnected button. You'll always have the flexibility to add this as something that exists or create something brand new. In this case, we'll create a new group and an asset to label it accordingly. We still have one more step to do because we'll also want to pull in the back-end applications. In this case, we'll now add it to the group that we just created, but create another new asset to differentiate the back-end from the front end. Now that we've created a 3-tier web application, as you can see in the platform, you can then focus on these particular machines. And you'll notice now the data to the right has changed. Some of the valuable data that Cloudomize will display here are things such as the firewall rules. So here you'll be able to identify inbound, outbound, and UDP rules. If you open up one of these tabs, you'll also be able to identify the process name, the port it communicates over, and the IP address. So this is displaying what needs to be pre-configured from a security standpoint prior to the migration. You can also import a CSV in order to apply tags that may already exist in your environment or use those tags to create groups. This can be very valuable when working with large environments because you're able to take a CMDB, for instance, and the internal valuable data that exists there, combine that with the data that exists in Cloudomize in order to get a holistic view of your environment and more quickly and swiftly plan the migration. Cloudomize's advanced filtering allows you to drill down into each metric that was collected. You can filter the machine and filter by compute. Here you can see there's many ways to identify machines very quickly. One way that most clients use this is to identify those machines that may need to be upgraded prior to the migration. An example of this would be to filter by either the OS version, another example to filter by would be the SQL version. Our ASR readiness report will generate a report that will tell you whether or not the workloads can be migrated via ASR as they are today or not. If they cannot be migrated via ASR today, we will point that out, but also provide how easy or difficult it is to make the change that needs to happen. Once you're ready to execute your migration, you can take action directly from the Cloudomize platform. Here, if you choose Migrate Your Environment, select ASR in this specific case. You'll first need to enter your ARM credentials into the Cloudomize platform. Once that is completed, you can then begin the setup and installation on the configured server. After that is finished, you'll select the configured server, pricing design, as well as workloads you would like to migrate. The appropriate machines will populate down below. First, you should always begin with testing. Once you identify that the testing is successfully completed within the Cloudamize platform, you can then execute your migration and directly take action in order to do so. You'll be able to access all of the log files throughout this entire process. Ultimately, this integration will help reduce the migration cycle by 75%. This concludes the Cloudamize portion of today's session.
Thank you so much, Liza. I think Cloudamize has some really powerful capabilities for heterogeneous discovery and assessment for Azure. Great stuff. All right, let's now bring Turbonomic on the stage. I'm joined by Moore from Turbonomic, and she's going to show you the capabilities that Turbonomic has for assessment and discovery for Azure.
Thanks, Abhishek. My name is Moore Cohental, and I am the Cloud CTO at Turbonomic. As Abhishek has clearly laid out, deciding to migrate to Microsoft Azure is a no-brainer. What's challenging is how to get there in the fastest and most cost-effective manner. First, organizations must assess and understand their existing environment. From this assessment, they will need to profile the workloads that will move to Azure and identify the compute and storage requirements. Then, they must map the requirements for each workload to one of millions of combinations of SKUs, storage tiering, and configurations, as well as mapping the various pricing alternatives offered by Microsoft. If that weren't enough, workload demand is constantly changing, and the Azure Service Catalog continues to expand, offering more options and services. Bottom line, even with weeks of work to assess the resource requirements of your on-premises workloads, this is beyond human scale. It's time for a new approach. The Turbonomic AI-powered decision engine leverages the power of software, not people and spreadsheets, to deliver the industry's fastest, most accurate assessments for Azure migrations. Turbonomic's agentless platform installs in minutes, discovers the complete on-premises estate in hours, and then automatically determines the cloud compute and storage resources needed for applications to perform at the optimal cost, while remaining compliant in Azure, including reserved instances and Azure hybrid benefits. How does Turbonomic deliver the fastest, most accurate cloud assessments? Via agentless, API-driven software, our platform first builds a model of the on-premises estate all the way from the applications to the underlying infrastructure. Turbonomic then profiles the application components as well as the iAzure containers where they reside, mapping them to the ideal cloud configuration. Turbonomic looks at the resources required by every application. If an organization has the same application running in a dev environment versus a production environment, they don't necessarily need the same SLA for that same application. So even though the demand profile of resources is going to be the same, our resulting recommendations will vary based on the performance requirements. Organizations might be willing to sacrifice some amount of performance on a dev or test instance to pay less than what they're willing to do in a production environment. With organizations paying by the minute, there is a cost associated with every decision they make. There are literally millions of options to consider when selecting from the innumerable SKUs provided by Microsoft Azure. Every decision made has an impact on compliance, performance, and the cost of that instance. In a world of dynamic workloads whose consumption demands change minute to minute, customers need Turbonomic to understand their hybrid estate and begin leveraging migration plans to drive the best outcome. With Turbonomic, customers understand the precise costs of migrating their applications like for like compared to a Turbonomic optimized resource profile. Prior optimization ensures organizations migrate right-sized workloads, eliminate over-provision, and the migration of underused resources, making it a key step in controlling costs from day one to keep migrations on track and on budget. Furthermore, Turbonomic models the cost options of different licensing strategies and discounting mechanisms, such as our RISE and Azure hybrid benefits. The result? Customers can quickly build a data-driven business case that supports a responsible and effective Azure migration. Turbonomic will also provide the actions to decommission or repurpose the vacated hardware on-premises to increase the ROI. Once an organization makes the decision to move to Azure, Turbonomic is there to assist them with the rest of their cloud journey, including migration planning and ongoing optimization. With the assessment complete in a matter of hours, Turbonomic, through our precise, real-time understanding of resource requirements, generates a detailed, optimized migration plan that drives substantial savings in 7 days or less. Our API-driven platform can integrate the plan into ASR to facilitate the migration. Once in Azure, customers unlock elasticity by scaling compute, storage, and Azure SQL to meet demand, and continuously adopt new SKUs, including promo SKUs, as they are released. Turbonomic eliminates the costly use of wasted or underutilized resources, as well as schedule the suspension of dev test workloads for off hours. Combining optimization actions with discounting mechanisms, Turbonomic automatically generates a granular cost comparison and compelling business case to support and accelerate a customer's journey to Azure. As a top Microsoft ISV, we couldn't be more excited to help accelerate an organization's digital transformation by providing a simple, fast, and accurate platform designed to assess an organization's on-premises estate, plan their Azure migration, and optimize the resources they need to continuously deliver the best performance at the lowest cost while maintaining the integrity of business policies. Abhishek, thank you for the opportunity. Back to you.
All right, that was a great demo on Turbonomic. Thank you so much, Moore. Good stuff. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you found the content useful, and I thank so much our friends at Cloudamize and Turbonomic for doing this together with us. Thank you.